ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, comrades and compañeros. Welcome to the Moynihan Report. I'm your host, Michael Moynihan, here on the Two-Way Network. We got an interesting one today, and I wanted to talk to you about it, as if it's like a two-way communication. This is a one-way communication, people, and I'm going to tell you what we're doing today. I have long, as many of you know, been what I would call an amateur, because I'm an amateur, historian of certain kind of times in recent history that have obsessed me and that I've written about or reviewed books about. And as many of you know, there's been a recent sort of resuscitation of a long discredited historian named David Irving. Now, if you don't know who David Irving is, you might have heard of him because there was a big Hollywood movie made about him. Rachel Weisz, is it Weisz or Weitz? I think it's Weitz because there's a Z on the end, starred in this film as a historian named Deborah Lipstadt. Deborah Lipstadt, back in the day, wrote a book about Holocaust denial. And in that book, she referred to the historian, and he's a real historian, named David Irving as a Holocaust denier. And my watch keeps talking to me, by the way. I'm just going to go right through this because it's giving me information about Holocaust denial. You say it and it triggers Cupertino and they start lecturing you on your watch. But this film follows a trial, and the film is called Denial, and the trial is often misunderstood. People think that David Irving himself was sued. He was not sued. He sued Deborah Lipstadt for calling him a Holocaust denier and said, no, that's not true. I am not. It was a very long, laborious, I think 28-day trial in which it's pretty fascinating because they get the defense, which is the people saying the Holocaust happened, had to marshal all of these experts like Robert Van Pelt, Sir Richard Evans, who is a really interesting historian who was just on my friend Winston Marshall's podcast. You should listen to that. It's really good. And all these people come in and they produce this mountains of evidence. And at the end of this, the judge, Irving, very stupidly acts as his own defense, and the judge deems him an anti-Semite, a racist, and a Holocaust denier. Verdict in favor of Miss Lipstadt. And that ruined him financially. And he turned a corner at that point and became, I think, a little more openly sympathetic to the Nazis and sympathetic to Adolf Hitler and trying to vindicate him over time. But I've read Irving's books, and I've always been interested in him. And back in the 90s, St. Martin's Press, to give you a sense of how mainstream he was, St. Martin's Press was publishing his biography of Goebbels, the Nazi propaganda minister. And very impressively, Irving had found in the Russian archives, which had recently opened and very quickly closed, by the way, after the fall of the Soviet Union, plates of missing parts of the Goebbels diaries. And this would inform his new biography. And the book was canceled after a lot of pressure. At the time, and to this day, I think that was the wrong decision. I agree with my old friend, Christopher Hitchens, who wrote a very good piece about this in Vanity Fair, that they should have stuck to it and published it, and we should have debated it and done essentially what happened in the Irving trial, which is other historians would tear this to shreds or say, well, this is the good stuff, this is the bad stuff. But Irving over time becomes more extreme. And he had a very famous book called Hitler's War, which was a bestseller. In the first version of that book, he doesn't say, that the Holocaust didn't happen, or doesn't doubt it, or doesn't question it in the way that he does in the second edition. The second edition is a very different book where Irving comes to what I would call full-on Holocaust denial. People weren't gassed, et cetera. And the numbers are too high. You know the whole script. So Irving has been sick. And this was reported in the news. He doesn't post on his website anymore. So I went to his website to see, after all these new people have discovered David Irving. Daryl Cooper. Well, many of you know of him, Martyr Made podcast guy, has referenced positively David Irving. There's been some reference by Tucker Carlson. Some of them don't say it directly, but they allude to him. So this kind of strange new respect, as we used to call it, for David Irving was surprising to me. And I wanted to see what was going on in his own world, his own website, because after the publication of the Goebbels book, because the publication was done by his own publishing company because it got canceled by St. Martin's Press. He started this thing called Focal Point Publishing and had a website, fpp.co.uk. And over there, you could buy Irving's books, and it was his diary, which was increasingly unhinged over time. And I went to the website and saw that it was different. It was very professional now. It wasn't professional before. And I dug into who was producing the website now. And I came across the name of Adam Irving, who I come to find out is David Irving's grandson. Now, as I say in what you're about to see, I don't believe in sins of the father, sins of the grandfather, anything like that. But I am interested in asking a person who is a young guy, obviously, he's his grandson, and I don't know his age, but he's probably in his 20s, who is, carrying the flame for what David Irving was publishing. So he restarted this publishing company, and I asked him if he would talk to me, expecting him to say no. And he didn't say no, but did want to talk before to say, what are you doing? He's setting me up. Is this going to be a hit job kind of thing? And I said, no, it's not. It's not what I'm interested in. I don't do that kind of thing. I'm not interested in sort of Piers Morgan type debate. I just am interested in why you're doing this, in what it was like to have a person like that as a grandfather. He's a very curious figure. There's been many profiles written about him. And I wanted to kind of add to the body of knowledge about that, of what it was like to grow up around David Irving and what it was like to take over his publishing company. Now, we do get into some kind of hairy things, and I push Adam on a number of these issues and his beliefs about these issues. And I will say that there's a thing that we agree on, and I'll say this up front. I'm not going to say, well, you can't listen to the interview because I'm going to tell you all about it now. But I'll say up front, I do believe that books like this should be published. Suppressing stuff never works. It never has worked. David Irving was jailed. He was kind of taunting the country of Austria, where he had given a speech denying the Holocaust in the past. And they said if he crossed the border, he'd go to jail, he'd be arrested. And he did. And I oppose that. And I think it's absolutely wrong to criminalize Holocaust denial. I think that it's great that there are people out there that make it their living and take their time, like Richard Evans, and like some of the other witnesses, Christopher Browning, et cetera, who poke holes in a lot of this nonsense. And I do, as many historians have, give a tiny amount of credit to Irving for the number of documents that he's pulled out. He was very good at getting the German side of the story, no surprise. But all of that stuff has to be treated with extreme skepticism and I would say a bit of care. But he's become popular again. And I think there's people in his family like Adam who see this popularity and are now selling his books. I don't think there was ever a break in selling the books, but he's made it very professional. And so it is back. The website is back. It's a different thing. It's more professional. So I talked to Adam, who I got to say, I thought was a very nice guy in our conversations. And there's some very, very interesting things that he says about his past and about his personal life that I think you'll all kind of find curious and interesting. And I was happy to do it. But as he says, he's not a scholar of this stuff. So you have to be very kind of careful about getting into debates with somebody who isn't a scholar, but with somebody who thinks it's necessary to continue publishing David Irving's books, not just secondhand market, but a push to get this stuff out there. Again, I don't oppose that, but I do oppose almost everything that's in David Irving's books, and as do many other people who are actual historians. I'm not one of them. But I hope we modeled this debate, this conversation in a way that was civil in trying to understand why this stuff is popular again. And he offers some answers and I challenge him on them. So this is my conversation. Adam Irving, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me on your show.
I have so much to ask. I mean, first off, where your grandfather, David Irving, has been quite sick for some time. It's been known. It's been publicized, but I know that you've tweeted about this and said he's not capable of signing copies of books anymore. What is the state of your grandfather's health at the moment?
Um, well, when I wrote the initial statement roughly 2 years ago, sort of announcing that he was ill, it was a period of time where he went to the US to go and see his friend. And he had a stroke on the way, and we couldn't get in touch with him. So we had to like look through his emails to try and figure out where he was and what had happened. And we found like a receipt for a hotel or something. And we rang the hotel. They said he's okay, but he's a bit sort of, maybe something's not quite right. And he managed to drive himself to his friend's house, but then the friend wrote us an email saying something's not right. He's not working. He's not eating. He's, it's not really like him. We managed to get him back to London. He actually traveled alone. The friend dropped him off at the airport, and when he got back, it was sort of like it was immediately apparent that we needed to take him to hospital, and the state of the British hospitals at the moment isn't great. So they were basically like, we need to take him to some kind of care home. But the waiting list in the UK at the moment, could easily be 6 months. Because the way that social services work here is that if you're safe in a hospital, then there's no sort of immediate need to find you sort of suitable housing where you're looked after.
Mm-hmm.
So we weren't really happy with the idea of just leaving him, in a group ward for months and months and months. By that point, he'd already been there for a month and a half, 2 months. So we sort of got the family together. We sort of, what can we do about this? And the only thing I could think of was to write to his customer database and let them know what happened. And we were just flooded with orders, donations. I think in the years sort of leading up to this stroke, which really affected his ability to write, because he had a previous stroke which left him without the ability to really speak. So he wasn't really doing those tours any longer, at least not on any kind of scale. And but yeah, when we reached out to his fans, we had just, I mean, we really couldn't believe it. I mean, when you refresh the page, there were just another 10 orders kind of thing. And obviously that slowed down. But that's what allowed him to stay at home, because we took him home. We found a carer. My background is actually in household staffing. So, what I was doing before getting involved in David's stuff was basically recruitment for butlers, housekeepers, nannies, chefs, when London was still sort of the capital of sort of high net worth individuals. And that's changed dramatically in the last sort of few years since Brexit and COVID hit. But because we had that network, we were able to find him a carer. We were able to just keep him at home, and that's really what we've been doing until now.
So he's lost the ability to speak, for the most part, to write. I mean, the cognitive ability is diminished, I presume. I mean, he is 86 years old. Is that right? 87?
87, 88.
Yeah.
I think my grandma's a year older. She just turned 89. So I think he's 88. He's not able to work. He, it's a progressive illness. So a year ago, when he came out of hospital, I would, say I'd bring him a new design for a cover, and he was just about able to say, I like it, I don't like it. He was able to sign books, but
is it dementia that he has, or some form of dementia, something similar?
I don't really want to say publicly what it is at this point, but like, needless to say, like, that he's had various strokes which have impacted his ability to work. But
so I mean, you're his grandson. I know he has how many kids? 5? I mean, how many did he end up with?
Four,
a couple of wives.
4 girls from his first marriage and 1 girl from his next relationship. So
Yeah.
his youngest daughter, Jessica, is 1 year younger than me.
Oh, is that right? You have a
Yeah.
wow. You have an
I have an
aunt.
aunt who's younger than me.
Wow. In most of them, I presume, are out of this business. And so people know you took over the David Irving empire, the focal point publishing and the publishing of the books and all the other. I mean, mostly the publishing of the books. Now the other stuff relied upon him as a person, doing
Mm.
tours and talks and such. I mean, you've said, I know you've spoken publicly about this stuff very rarely, that you had I mean, kind of everyone, it seemed like, had a difficult relationship. Families are complicated, I understand that. But you kept on coming back. In the one interview I saw of you saying it was a very difficult relationship. Explain that a little bit to me, of how you had a difficult
Well,
relationship with
I
your
mean,
grandfather.
I don't want to single him out. Like,
Oh, for sure. Yeah, of course.
I come from a very eccentric family.
Yes.
So even like the people in our family, who aren't notorious, who, are not famous, there's a lot of eccentric characters in different ways. Um, I kind of grew up thinking that like English families were just kind of eccentric. Now I'm wondering whether it was
So did
mine were
I.
just more eccentric than others.
Yeah.
Um, but they kind of came out of like a weird time, didn't they? I mean, like, his he sort of he was born when sort of the war was getting started, and his dad was away, and his primary caretaker was his mother. Um,
And his
uh,
father died during the war, correct?
no, his father died in the 50s or
Okay.
60s. I think he was a big smoker actually, and had some kind of related throat cancer or something.
Mhm.
And he was estranged from his father for the most part until his father was dying, and I think he then moved in with David, and they actually worked on a book together called the Smokescreen of Jutland,
Yeah.
Smokescreen of
Yeah.
Jutland,
Yeah.
which they sort of co-authored. That's one of the projects that I've been working on over the last 2 years. Sort of, it's trying to make people aware that, like, we actually come from a family of writers. It's not just David. Like, both his parents wrote. Like, his mother wrote a book called The Dawn Child, which we've brought back into print. Not that you can see
Mhm.
it very well.
Yeah.
And his father wrote several biographies on battles that had happened in World War One.
And,
And so
and your grandfather had a twin.
Nicholas, yeah, he died
Yeah.
this year.
He died this year, and then another brother. And I ask you about that because you
John.
read any of the background and any newspaper articles about David Irving, and there's invariably mention of the fact that his twin brother denounced him. His other brother, I think John was the other
Yeah.
brother, also didn't want to have anything to do with
He
him.
was
So that
he was very
complicates.
no, he was very he didn't have a relationship with his twin. They were extremely different. I never met Nicholas. Um, Something happened and none of us quite know what. But Nicholas would come around to David's flat in Duke Street every weekend, and I think they would work on family genealogy or something together. And then I think it just stopped one weekend to the next, and nobody quite knows why. So they were different, but they kind of did spend time together until that point. Then his older brother John, he was extremely close to. I think he really looked up to John. John was an inventor. He had a very interesting life as well.
Mhm. But
Not
but
so
it,
fun.
it's kind of odd. It's the interesting thing about the family and a family of writers and the kind of notoriety of your grandfather is that they're all contacted at one point, and I'm taking these articles as accurate, and you can clarify that both were very clear that they wanted nothing to do with David's politics and with his work in kind of the historical realm and writing about Nazism and such, like things like
I
that.
don't even know this. I don't know if it's related, but it's interesting, which is that his older brother John actually converted to Islam. He was Muslim.
Yeah.
And he was a practicing Muslim who raised pigs, and drank alcohol. But like, it kind of just shows you, like, the thought process in this family doesn't go A, B, C. It's a little bit
No,
more
it kind
complicated.
of it sort of reminds me of the Mitfords. I mean, you have someone who's converted to Islam, you have all sorts of weird variations politically, and it's
I mean, I think
something.
John might have done it just because he wanted to get married to another woman. He was still married, and
uh,
he was living in
that's
Oman at the time.
yeah,
And I think he
yeah,
was living with his mistress in Oman at the time.
yeah.
And um, the sheikh or whoever was in charge, the sort of ruling person, because I think he was there working with the Navy at the time, or the Air Force, said to him, it's not right that you're living with a mistress. You need to convert her into a wife. And so he converted, and then he got married to this other lady. But yeah, I mean, but David and him were close. I don't know what politically how aligned their opinions were, but I know that they were on speaking terms, and David definitely admired that brother.
But he was
Nicholas
a,
was
he
like,
was clearly, by all accounts, and even from people who liked him and had a lot of respect for him, that he's a difficult guy. I mean, would you describe your grandfather? I mean, I think you said as much yourself about your relationship with him, which was difficult and fraught. And how would you describe your relationship with your grandfather?
complicated, because on the one hand, he's an impressive figure, I suppose, with the work that he's done. On the other hand, as a human, someone, like as a kid, what you really want from your relatives in general is love and guidance, right? And I'm not sure that was really something that he was able to offer many people in a traditional sense. It's like someone turned the dial up to the max on intellect, but turned the dialect down on empathy and being able to relate to people in a normal way. So, like I've said this before, but he seemed to be more at ease speaking to a room full of strangers than having a conversation one-on-one. Like, he would have been able to do something like this quite
Yeah.
easily, but as a sort of work thing. But the longest conversation I really had with him privately was probably about an hour, us one-on-one, and that was just before he had that big stroke.
And what was the context and the situation of that? Why had he decided it was worthy of an hour of conversation after all this time?
Um, well, I'll be honest with you, like he was starting to wonder whether Josephine, who was my aunt who died in 99, whether there'd been foul play involved in what happened to her. And also he wondered whether his speech had been affected for similar reasons. I don't know. That could be old age having already been affecting him in his way of thinking. I don't, the world is so nuts nowadays. I don't really like discredit anything. Like, I like to, like, I kind of go, okay, it could be true, it might not be. I just don't know.
But I mean, he
Um,
sort of became, I mean, I told you this when I asked you to come on, that I've read almost everything that your grandfather has produced. I very much disagree with almost not almost all of it, but a lot of it. Yet I understand, like the Hugh Trevor Roper, Gordon Craig, John Keegan, all these famous historians who said, the guy has a singular ability to kind of find documents, get people to talk. His German was perfect. He could translate this stuff. The utility of him. I mean, the New York Review of Books published Gordon Craig's review of the Goebbels book in '96. And it was very tough, but also had a lot of positive things to say. about Irving, but I noticed following his career that there was kind of a second half
Hmm.
when he seemed to have changed and abandoned the mainstream, because he'd been on the fringes of the mainstream. I mean, keep in mind that the
Hmm.
Goebbels book, for those who don't know, you clearly do know this, was St. Martin's Press, one of the biggest publishers in America, most prestigious ones, backed out of publishing it, and it created a controversy. But the important point was that they agreed to publish it before in '95. I mean, they knew who he was, and he was still within that universe of mainstream historians. And it seems like after that, and after the trial with Deborah Lipstadt, and if people know that, they probably know of it from a Hollywood film with Rachel Weisz, and it's called, what is the name of the film again?
Denial.
Denial. And that, which also to make sure people understand this too, is your grandfather actually sued her. It wasn't the other way around. But after that, he seemed to have taken a turn, in a turn to what I would say is more conspiratorial, much more political. And his website was just really a different kind of
Yeah, I
thing.
wonder whether that a lot of that is to do with the fact that he provoked some people throughout his career, and he probably didn't realize what a backlash he was going to get. And then when he started to get such backlash, maybe especially from the Jewish community, it probably, I can imagine, sort of almost turned him against them more, and that might maybe what made him more
I mean, it was
disgusting.
yeah. So in 2000 at the trial, um, the Justice Gray, who is the presiding judge, and the entire trial is really fascinating. I mean, there's books from players involved. There's one kind of neutral book by actually a left-wing writer in America called D.D. Gutenplan,
Hmm.
which is a really kind of interesting, not polemical, not political book about the trial. Um, but the judge is obviously showing him respect and kind of helping him along at certain points, because your grandfather offers his own defense. He doesn't have counsel with him. And at the end of that, when he rules against David Irving, he calls him a racist, an anti-Semite, an active Holocaust denier. And that's,
Which at that time might have meant something, but if you call somebody that now, I think those terms have been so sort of watered down.
yeah, particularly the first one. Yeah,
Mm.
racist particularly. But I mean, what do you make of that? And that's why I'm interested in you, because you don't strike me as a particularly political person. I've talked to you before this, or somebody, you said like, I'm not in the weeds and what my grandfather did as far as scholarship and things like that. What makes you want to take over this business of publishing his books? And you say there's a lot of orders from America, a lot of orders in general, when that reputation hangs over him. I mean, is that something that you consider, that your friends, your partner, whatever it might be, that there's a bit of a black mark on
Um,
David Irving, that you would say, well, I'm going to
it's
take
scary
over his
because
business?
I, I definitely feel like there's a big potential to be, um, what do they say? Tainted with the same brush.
Yeah.
Um, because
I don't
I'm
believe
actively
I don't believe in sins of the grandson, by the way.
no, but
I don't mean that in any way.
I suppose I have decided
Yeah.
to continue to do this, right? So nobody forced me to do it, but I also did sort of just fall into it. And I fell into it because, well, my mum and I were really the only close family members who are left in London. He lives in London. So there's the proximity factor. I find his work very interesting. I mean, I find his world very interesting. More than the work, I find the world that
And what do you
he
mean
was
by
very
the
interesting.
world? Like just his fans. I mean, there is I think with a lot of people like your grandfather, a kind of parasocial relationship that, as you said, you say he's sick, and then you get a flood of donations and orders. I mean, there's an article in The Guardian in 2017, which was quite prescient. I don't think it was probably true at the time, but it became true now. Is the headline, I noted it down here, is anti-Semite Holocaust denier, yet David Irving claims fresh support. It was 8 years ago. And there seems to be a lot of truth to that now. So there is that world is kind of, and the reason I was interested in talking to you is it seems like it's kind of more powerful and more popular than it's been in a long
Well,
time.
I think that the timing, his decline and me getting involved and me being kind of social media savvy perhaps
Yeah,
coincided with a time when people's eyeballs were on what was going on with Israel and Gaza.
yeah.
And so I have a feeling that when we started to post clips, short form clips based on the longer interviews that he did on X, which then got picked up by Gen Z and then shared on platforms like TikTok, it kind of created its own momentum and sort of started things back up again.
But do you
Um,
reject Judge Gray's comment that he was a racist, anti-Semite, and active Holocaust denier?
I mean, one of his fans said to me the other day that they wouldn't say he's a revisionist, they would say that he is a correctionist. But like, frankly, like I don't have like I'm not well versed enough in World War II history or even my granddad's work to be able to say whether I would say he's a Holocaust denier or look, he's a guy of his time. Is he a bit racist? Probably, you know. um, but then
I mean,
again,
there's a lot of things. I mean, homophobic. I mean, I remember reading in the trial that in his
yeah, I mean,
diaries
he
that's
was
he says that
homophobic.
AIDS is the final solution to wipe out blacks and homosexuals in his private diaries that is presented as evidence during the trial. I mean, that's pretty hard stuff.
It is, and but then again, so many people in our family are gay or bisexual, and he still, he was still on speaking terms with them. Like for him, it just seemed to be like a thing that, for example, my sexuality. I mean, I've told him to his face during arguments before I'm gay or whatever, and it kind of just goes in this area and out the other one, and didn't really affect our relationship on a personal level. I don't think he treated me any worse or better than any of our other family members.
Yeah.
Is he homophobic? Probably. I think he probably thinks that, like, a relationship should be between a man and a woman. Is he racist? I mean, would he date a black woman? I don't think he would. Um, is he an
Would he
anti-Semite?
be okay if you dated a black man? I think that would probably make his head explode, right?
Well, I'm not going to say who, but I know that like one of our relatives has, so
Yeah. Yeah.
and I don't think it made his head explode. I think, probably made him close his eyes for 5 minutes and go and have a nap, and then, the world moves on, right? Like you can't control your family, you can't control if your family are gay, bisexual, you know, like to sleep with other races or date other races or whatever. Like none of those things have, look, I don't have a speaking relationship with my father. My father worked in advertising and half his friends were gay, but when I came out the closet, my dad had a big problem with it. David,
He's
on the other
is
hand,
he he's Polish, you said? Is that
he's
was
Polish. Well, his
yeah.
parents are Polish. He
Okay.
was born in London. But David, on the other hand, publicly might say, you know, I'm anti-gay or, make a racist comment. But when I look at the circle that he had around him, I mean, one of his closest friends and fans was a gay man. Um, there's me, he never cut me off. There's another relative who's bi. Um, he was accused of misogyny and yet the closest people to him in his life were always women. Um, so I think it's complicated.
I mean, he
Um,
seems to be, on top of, all the things we've been talking about. I mean, something of a provocateur and enjoyed. I mean, he's obviously not somebody who shirked his, or I should say, shrunk from any of these controversies in public. I mean, the public trial happens, and people in the media saying, his reputation is in tatters. He used to be in semi-good standing in certain places, and now no one will talk to him. And it didn't seem to really bother him. I mean, he just went on with life. I mean, it's a kind of a personality type
well,
that it
that's
seems to
kind of
me.
the serious scholarly work is kind of how I see it, which are the books. And then you have this kind of, I guess now we would call them an influencer, right? You've got like the likes of Nick Fuentes and
Yeah.
these sorts who go out and say outrageous things. And I kind of separate it in my mind of it as a little bit like, well, the work is one thing, and this kind of on-stage persona is something else. And I don't know if that goes back. He used to say something like, all publicity is good publicity. I don't know if that fed into it, like in a way. I think it's easy too. I mean, if you look at some of like the modern day sort of figures who've maybe taken his place, you know, there's a part of me that thinks that when they start out, they really do believe in the things that they're saying. And then over time, there's a need to become more and more outrageous in order
That's right.
eyeball.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that. I don't want to name any specific names to do a sort of the influencer sort of podcasty.
I mean, I can say them as that, the people I'm thinking of is, Daryl Cooper, who does the Martyr Made podcast, Tucker Carlson, a number of people in that. I mean, I know Tucker Carlson has alluded to your grandfather, going to jail in Austria, something that I think.
Why are they so scared of saying his name, though? That's what I don't get. Like,
so that's interesting.
Referencing him, but they never, just say this is based on David Irving.
Well, it's kind of why I want to talk to you in a way, because I mean, there is such a toxicity that is associated with David Irving that they want to skirt around it. I think Daryl Cooper has ultimately been more open about and said, I know he's tweeted about Hitler's War and some other of David Irving's books, but there's such a toxicity, which is one of the reasons I want to talk to you, is that, I mean, we had a lovely conversation before we did this interview, and you didn't seem like a fire-breathing guy or somebody who even was particularly political and was like, I want to continue on this legacy. But that legacy is a very toxic one in, tying your name. And I know you're already an Irving, but, that tying your name to him when, people in his own family, people have, when asked publicly, tried to distance themselves from David Irving, whereas you seem to be moving closer to it. And that's interesting to me. Particularly when it's like, you don't want to say, like, I don't want to defend the historiography of a lot of this stuff because I'm not super familiar with it and I'm not a scholar of this stuff. So why do you want to do it?
Well, I'm a publisher, and I think that essentially David's work can stand on its own. I don't have to be the one to explain what his opinions are. I publish. I believe in free speech. I believe everybody has the right to an opinion. I think as long as you're not harming, physically or, hurting somebody else, then say what you want. And, we'll have to put up with other people's opinions. I mean, in the UK at the moment, where I landed last night, I came back from Spain. And like, honestly, I felt scared when I went to through passport control. I was like, God, maybe something I've said on Twitter recently is going to be considered far-right extremism and promoting violence or whatever. And I actually had a moment when I went through passport control. I was like, oh God, am I going to get stopped? Because it's been happening so often recently.
Yeah, Graham Linehan, for instance, as one of many getting arrested when he came. Look, we're in 1000% agreement on this. And I mean, I've told you before, I've mentioned on my own show, I've mentioned a number of times that I think that the arrest of your grandfather in Austria is an outrage. It was an outrage. It remains an outrage. I don't believe that banning David Irving books does anybody any good. I think the reason I can, send you a message and say, just so you know, I really, really disagree with your grandfather. And, I agree with the decision in the Lipstadt case because we can have an argument about it because I've read the books because they were available to me to read. And I think that, some of these historians, I think it was Raoul Hilberg, the great historian who wrote The Destruction of European Jewry, said, look, Irving provokes us into more research. And in an interview that I think he did with Christopher Hitchens in Vanity Fair, that there's a utility in this stuff beyond the fact that he brings out documents and things like that. But we should be debating this stuff. And I'm fully on board with that. But when you say that people who are already have you know, people have bad opinions of them, the, you know, Daryl Coopers and Tucker Carlson's of the world who don't want to say the name. That gives you some sense of just how toxic the name of David Irving is. I mean, we were talking about the
The
things, is
name,
he,
but not the material, because they're
well, the
still
material
citing the
too, right?
material.
I mean, the material
But then
too.
why
I
are
mean,
they're rehashing it though? So for
they're
some
rehashing it
reason,
and it's being debated again. I mean, I saw that on the Twitter account that you run, which is the David Irving Twitter account, which you do run that account, right?
yeah,
That's
for the
you.
most
Yeah.
part.
For the most part, is that you know, you tweeted kind of a shot at a friend of mine of
Good.
Winston Marshall,
Yeah.
who interviewed Richard Evans,
Hmm.
who testified against your grandfather. And look, I think I disagree with Evans on a lot of things, but on balance, I think you
How
know the
much money
stuff.
did Richard Evans get paid? Because the figure seems to change every time, like I hear someone talking about it or I look at
Oh, I'm sure he got paid a
it.
lot. I mean, he produced a 700-page report. I mean, that was he did a deep dive into a lot of that stuff. But I think it's valuable, the conversations with him. I think Winston did a very good job. And I thought it was an interesting thing is that that's what we do with history and with historians and with their books and with their documents. We debate them. And again, I'm fully on board with you of like anybody that tries to prevent debate on these things is an enemy of mine. But I don't think that means that we should give anyone an easy ride. And I think that the verdict in the case that was brought that your grandfather brought against Lipstadt, I agree with the verdict wholeheartedly. And you know, I hope you don't take offense to that. You seem
I
like a
don't
nice
really,
guy.
because everybody has a right to an opinion, and maybe in a court he got officially labeled as a anti-Semite and a racist, and if that's enough to persuade people not to buy his books, they don't need to buy his books.
Well, the
But I
books.
don't think that
One
we
of the
should
things
be
I think.
sitting here and banning books,
No,
because
no, no,
doesn't that
absolutely
go
not.
back to what the Nazis did, which is literally burning books?
No,
I
I
mean, he
think
had
that.
publishers who were pulping his books. And if we go back to why did respectable publishers, a couple of decades ago, still want to publish his books, but then would, then suddenly dropped him? I don't think that that was for ethical reasons. I think a lot of the reasons why he got dropped were practical. Waterstones, which is our big bookshop in the UK, would have stones thrown through the windows, and therefore the insurance wouldn't cover them any longer. And I think, similarly, there was either a book printer or a book warehouse that was burned down by someone because his books are there. So I think a lot of them were practical reasons, like insurance and this kind of thing, as opposed to we
And now,
just don't publish work by
I
date.
can attest to the fact that publishers regularly print bullshit history books in the United States all the time that make me very angry and exercise, and I write about them and I talk about them. But when we were talking about that verdict, we didn't get to that one final piece, which is the one I think is undeniable, is that your grandfather was just transparently an anti-Semite. I mean, he was very sort of open about it, particularly on his website. And by the way, I used to go to the website when it was kind of hand-coded HTML kind of stuff. And when I contacted you, I was like, oh my God, it's been redone in this very professional way. And it used to be very angry stuff with some really, really wild stuff on it, caricatures. And I would say that was just racist stuff. I mean, that's gone now and the books remain, which
You
the books
might
are
you
different,
might
but
be right, and I don't really see that as the direction that I want to go with it, with
precisely. Yeah.
FPP
Yeah.
going into the future. Like when I think about FPP, I mean FPP in terms of what
That's
was
the
David's
website.
old
Yeah.
blog, which I'm now trying to turn into a little bit of an online newspaper. I just want it to be a newspaper where like free speech can really flourish and we can have opinion pieces from all sides. Like I don't really see us as being a right-wing publisher. I see us as being a publishing house for books that wouldn't otherwise see the light of day. So I'm super happy to get to have proposals come in from anyone who feels like a traditional imprint publishing house wouldn't want to touch them with a barge pole, as long as they have something to say and it's not complete lunacy. There's some basis in how did this person come to the conclusion that they have?
Yeah.
I think people are, our readers are intelligent enough to make up their own mind.
Why do you
And
think that the books and his work is finding a new audience now? I mean, you mentioned October 7th, which to me is odd that, a war in the Middle East would make people gravitate towards your grandfather's books about
I
the
think
Second World War.
I I think people have just lost trust in people have lost trust in government, people have lost trust in mainstream media. People are looking for answers. People don't want to be told what to think any longer. And what they did when they sort of banned David Irving is sort of give people, by doing that, they created a space to go, what did this guy have to say that's so interesting that they had to ban him and put him in jail? So when people are looking for answers, they sort of gravitate back towards these anti-establishment figures. And I suppose when I got involved, and I don't have a major understanding, but had a little bit of understanding about, how younger people want to consume content, I realized, most people aren't going to listen to a 3-hour David Irving, Q&A, but they might listen to a 2-minute soundbite that's interesting and then go on to read the full book. And that's really what I've been doing. And then those clips are shared. But I'm trying to create a business where you don't have to believe what David Irving said in his books. You can go to theirvingcollection.org afterwards and download the documents that David based his work on. So that's been a major project for us for the last year, has literally been scanning the microfilm that David based a lot of his work on. Because I think a lot of it's probably hard to obtain elsewhere. And we're making it pretty easy for people to be able to consume. So, yeah, we've got a bookstore, we've got the archive, and we have the online magazine essentially, and they sort of all feed into each other. But I'm just happy that we've been able to.
Yeah, the microfilm stuff, particularly the stuff from the KGB archives, which was, impressively obtained in the 90s, which informed the Goebbels book, and those plates of Goebbels' diaries that were only available, that the Russians had and nobody else had. I mean, it's a great boon to scholars that people can access that stuff. But that the response to this is, okay, Adam, do you want to make your living selling books that have been widely derided by mainstream historians? I'm not talking about groups, Jewish groups, AIPAC, or whatever one wants to say, that have been widely derided by historians as saying, they're intentionally misleading, because David was on one particular side, and he was one of the rare historians that was much more sympathetic to the Germans than anyone else was. I mean,
I don't know. Do you think he was deliberately misleading? Is that what?
Yeah, I think in certain examples, I mean, he acknowledged it during the trial. For instance, the stuff about Dresden, a document that he acknowledged that was a forgery, an extra zero added to a number of casualties that he acknowledges in the trial. I mean, it came out in the trial too that he was aware of that before. I think that the problem with David Irving as a historian, particularly later David Irving as a historian, is the second version of Hitler's War being a good example of this, is that when you're in this fight and you're trying to prove your point, you sometimes very deliberately overlook evidence that would contradict that point, which I don't think is the job of a historian. I mean, that's a polemicist, that's a political actor. And if somebody's trying to get all that stuff out there, why cut words from a quote, you know,
Yeah,
about.
I agree. I mean, I think everybody is biased to some degree, one way or the other, but I guess the job of a historian is to try and be as least biased as possible.
Yeah.
Um,
But
I
the thing to
know,
me is that I'm just wondering, as somebody
I know during the trial they said, you know, of all the mistakes that, you know, that he has in his books, they all sort of tend to lean towards making Hitler look like the good guy
yes.
and the other side seem nasty.
Well, as the judge said, anything that vindicates the other position,
I
David
do
Irving
wonder though that
demands extraordinary amounts of evidence, but not so
if
much in the other
if
direction.
you were working for the defense and you were gonna, isn't it in your interest in a way to only find the mistakes that he said going in one direction and not the other? Like,
Well, of course. I mean, that was the premise of the trial. Of course, for those who are not entirely aware, was that David Irving sued Deborah Lipstadt, the
mhm,
American writer who called him a Holocaust denier. And the verdict of the trial was that he was indeed a Holocaust denier. And then, you know, it's hard to, you know, dispute that from not only the evidence, but, you know, you look at the website that before you took it over and made it slicker and more modern, is that anytime the word Holocaust was there, it was in quotation marks. It was the Holocaust. I mean, that's clearly
mm.
not somebody who believes that the Holocaust happened in the way that most
But I think,
historians
you know,
understand it.
I haven't read all his work, but you know, I remember reading some pages where he spoke about how every Jewish life lost, for example, was a real tragedy. So I think it's not that he was pro-death. I think he always thought that every death was horrendous.
I mean, he also said that the very, very odd thing that Hitler was the best friend the Jews had in Germany, which to say that with a straight face strikes me as rather unbelievable.
Maybe it's like because there was some plan about, you know, again, I'm like I told you, I'm not an expert on any of these subjects, but from the little that I know, I remember sort of in the earlier years, like Hitler was had a plan to maybe send the Jews
The
to
Madagascar plan,
Madagascar or
yeah,
something like
yeah.
that. So maybe that's where that
Yeah, he
came
was also
from.
kicking Germans out of their own country because they were Jewish, which is, you know, itself, you know, kind of an insane idea. And I would hope that that would never happen in England or the United States. And again, I don't want to do a thing,
Well, that's
Adam,
the other
where,
reason why I'm continuing to publish this material. I know I'm involved. I'm a big believer in not making the same mistakes twice. And I look at the world today and I see it just sort of playing out, sort of just a repeat of what happened close to 100 years ago. And I don't want people to make that mistake. I want us to remember, you know, how awful that period was. And frankly, I guess, you know, the final survivors from that period are sort of are dying at the moment. Maybe that's also why there's a resurgence, because we don't have the voices of the survivors really anymore.
Adam, are you a Holocaust denier?
No.
In the sort of general, if you go to Yad Vashem, the museum, or the American Holocaust
You want to
Museum.
you want to clarify what you mean by
Yeah, no,
Holocaust?
that's what I'm doing now. And I don't, and, you know, I want to be clear about it that, you know, Raoul Hilberg says, you know, 5 million people, the common number is 6 million, but we're talking about millions of people that
Mhm.
were exterminated, like deliberately exterminated because they were Jewish. Strikes me that that would be the Holocaust, right? I mean, you can argue about little
I
things here
believe
and
that
there,
Jewish people were targeted, and I also believe that gay
but
people were
murdered or targeted.
targeted and murdered, executed.
Yeah,
Um,
gassed.
that's where my knowledge kind of falters because I'm not an expert enough in it. I need to read more of the work, to be honest. Probably. I don't know on what scale. I wouldn't be, if you ask me how many people do you think died in that war, I wouldn't be able to tell you.
Yeah,
Do I think that a lot of Jewish people and other people died, you know, through execution at that period? Yes.
but you're unclear on the gassing.
I'm unclear on the method of execution that led to that total number, yes.
Right. I would just recommend to you one of the
I
one of
want to
the
be informed. I want you to
no, no,
explain it to
I'm going to
me.
recommend something to you. I'm presuming that you're an honest broker in this, and your views aren't reflective of exactly of your grandfather's. I mean, he grew up in an environment where that question, I imagine, was going to make people pause. It doesn't make me pause at all because I've read and researched this for many, many years of my life. And I was a guy named Robert Jan van Pelt, who was one who the defense brought as a witness against your grandfather, wrote a book about the evidence for Auschwitz, and it is a doorstop of a book, and it is just indisputable. And any person who has an open mind and is not looking for
I guess
a
it's just
political
like for
outcome.
me, and maybe you actually have an answer for this, which I don't, but from what I've looked into it, the bit that just doesn't seem to make sense are the cremations. Like how did they cremate that many bodies so fast, with the facilities that they had when we wouldn't be able to do that nowadays?
Well, I would recommend somebody for you actually. And this person was a Holocaust denier. And I think his name is Albert Butz. Was it Albert Butz or was it somebody else? But you can look this up. There's a guy who was in Pennsylvania, and I think he was a fan of your grandfather's. And he made the same argument until one day, and there's a story about this. I think it was Esquire magazine wrote this up when he had this moment where he's taking his own children. I mean, it's a very crazy thing to do, in lining them up and trying to figure this out, and realizes that he was wrong, and that it is actually very possible due for a variety of reasons. And again, I
Did
am
he
not.
change his mind on everything in the end? That's what I'm curious about.
I think
What
so. I
conclusion
mean,
did he come
everything
to?
is hard. I don't know, but particularly on this issue, he did, and he spent his entire life devoted to being what we would call a Holocaust denier, and he
Would you call
backed
me a
away from it.
Holocaust denier for saying I just don't know?
No, I wouldn't call you a Holocaust denier. I would wonder why somebody who is well educated, intelligent, in publishing books, and particularly the second iteration of Hitler's War, wouldn't want to be more informed about that stuff before letting that out into the world. I don't believe letting it out into the world is probably a bad phrase, because I don't care of anything being let out into the world, because I like debating things. I think people should have all that information and go back and forth with each other on it and enlighten themselves to it. But when you're publishing books that are representing one side of this debate, which I don't think is much of a debate at this point, it's a very, very small number of people, very, like, almost vanishingly small number of people who are professional historians. I mean, almost none. I mean, your grandfather was probably the only one who could speak German, understood the war. I mean, as Gordon Craig said in that 96 review in the New York
Well,
Review.
how much of that do you think is down to the fact that most of these historians are attached to an institution where they'd immediately be fired if they ever stepped out of line?
I don't buy it, mostly because for a couple of things. I mean, you have people that are and particularly now, and you know this very well, is that somebody like a Daryl Cooper, who's not really a historian, he's an amateur historian, he reads a lot, I guess, can make a lot of money doing something like this. Was that the case in the past? Probably not, but a lot of them aren't institutional historians and are people who just publish books.
I can tell you that we don't make a lot of money. We might have a decent turnover, but the books business, in terms of
It's
what
not great,
profit,
no.
by
Yeah.
the I think we grew sales by something like 800% since taking over from David. That's not to say we did an amazing job. It's just that David, by the end, was unable to do so much by
Yeah.
himself, and maybe the timing,
And you
whatever,
understand technology better, and you know how to push
kind
the
of,
stuff
or
out there.
all
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gosh, where was I going with this point? Yeah, we grew our book sales. Why was that relevant again? I'm trying to think. Gosh,
Well,
sorry.
I would just say this, Adam, is that I don't oppose anyone selling books, regardless of what they are. I don't think Mein Kampf should be banned in Germany. It has done nothing to stem the tide of people who are neo-Nazis or people. I mean, I think, is what we call the Streisand effect. It makes people
Of
more
course,
interested
of
rather
course it
than
does.
less. But I am interested in your taking this on, because you see what happened to your grandfather. You see what happens to people who.
You know what? It's interesting work, and it's varied work, and I've got pretty bad ADHD. I'm not someone who likes to do the same thing repetitively. And this business is so varied. There's always something different. There's always something interesting happening. And I find it fascinating, even when I've met with people who are maybe like, far right extremists and I've had a conversation with them, I always find it interesting to see how their minds work. And there's always an element which I agree with, and then there'll be sort of a broader perspective where I don't.
Well,
Um,
I'll leave. We'll end it on this because I'm interested in this. I mean, you seem to be saying in a lot of ways that your work is non-political. You don't have the political motivations or interests of your grandfather. But what are your politics? How would you classify yourself? And you said, you meet people on the far right. Most people don't meet people on the far right. I mean, your grandfather had a lot of fans on the far right. So I'm sure there's people sending letters, interfacing with you.
I don't
But
know. I assumed when I got involved with this that, like, for example, my sexuality would be a big problem with a lot of his fans, and I haven't found that at all, for
do they
example.
know?
Yeah, I've
How
mentioned
do
it.
people know that?
I think there's been previous interviews I've done where it popped up in
Yeah.
conversation, and I think I had one guy go, "Why are you gay?" or whatever, posting the "Why are you gay" thing, and I was like, "Well, I don't know. Maybe nature nurture both. I'm not sure."
Yeah.
Um, but I haven't really had that much hatred, and generally speaking, the people I've interacted with haven't been that hateful. Uh, a lot of people we interact with seem to be just concerned for their countries. And when we see this sort of like mass replacement happening in Europe at the moment, which is quite scary, if you look at the statistics of sort of,
But does that mean that they're sort of sympathetic to Nazism or fascism? Because the immigration issues, which I've been very critical of in Europe, I don't know why that brings you to a book about the Second World War if you're not thinking, hey, maybe these Nazis had a pretty good idea about this.
I don't know if there's maybe a perception that most people who buy our books are also right-wing extremists. I don't think that's the case at all. All sorts of reasons why people want to read our books. We have Jewish people emailing us quite a lot as well, trying to understand, their history and, what happened at that particular episode of time. I think we're all curious as to how does a country develop in that way so quickly and become so extreme. And I think this is happening again. I mean, look what's happening in America right now. People are more polarized than ever. I feel like the same thing in Europe right now. Like, we're going into sort of, as the officials love to say, unprecedented times. But why?
Mm.
People aren't being listened to. The everyday person isn't being listened to. And that opens up a space for extremism.
So you would
When
say
your
you're
government doesn't listen.
would you say you're it's funny on the David Irving Twitter feed, I saw that you retweeted something from Julian Assange, a man who published David Irving's hacked emails, which was
Yeah.
pretty interesting. Because so
I,
I gather there's some differences in your politics to your grandfather's, but would you say
Mhm.
you're a person of the right?
But again, like, being right wing nowadays is just, everything is just become so skewed that everything went so far left that everybody looks like a right wing extremist.
Yeah, yeah. And
So,
your
no,
husband is left wing.
he's pretty liberal, yeah.
Yeah, and that's okay. That doesn't, you have a liberal husband.
Look,
You're
my husband is the type of person that goes, if somebody wants to call themselves a woman and be a woman, you should refer to them as a woman, you should believe they're a woman. I'm like, well, okay, but we have to also, like, let's go back to reality here and go, there are two genders. You can be a man or you can be a woman. I'm happy for someone to call themselves whatever they want. Doesn't mean I have to believe it.
And then you
But
say,
no,
I have 30 copies of Hitler's War to ship out. How is this? This
I
relationship's
don't
gonna
know
last?
because but I think your generation, my generation, excuse me for like say there's maybe a little bit of a gap in our ages.
Yeah.
But for example, like one of my best friends, uh, she came into the office to water the plants while I'm gone. She's dating a Russian Jew at the moment, and he's maybe a tiny bit younger than me, but about the age of 30. And he came in, he didn't know who I was. So on the board, oh, must bring in, 30 copies of signed Hitler's War or whatever. And he was like, oh my God, so your best friend's granddad is David Irving. He just burst out laughing. It
Mm,
wasn't that he took major offense to the fact that the woman he's dating's best friend, runs this publishing house.
yeah.
So I think like sort of the younger generation just doesn't put such a weight on this stuff that your generation does. Like we're more willing to circle back to this topic and look at alternative explanations.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even worse would be your grandfather's generation when
You
he
know,
says, my gay grandson has got these Russian Jews in the office. That's probably not what he had in mind when he wrote the book. But Adam, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. I hope it wasn't too horrible. And
no, not at all.
I like talking to people who, is your publishing stuff I disagree with. I don't care, and I'm happy to have you on the show, Adam.
Hey, maybe you can contribute to fpp.co.uk once we're properly live.
I do have my
But-
limits.